the Sierra West Current Construction and Remodeling Costs Book. And we often refer to it in the office as the Red Book, and that is going to look at the rehabilitation costs. And that's the book that has the different F factors, which go over the degrees of difficulty for each of your material costs. So on the first page of that cost estimate under Part 1, you're going to have that reference number from that Sierra West Red Book. You're going to have the description as it appears in that book. You're going to insert the quantity as it appears in your DSA-approved plans. And then you're going to include what kind of measure of unit. Is it linear feet? Is it square feet? Things like that. In column 5, you're going to use the unit cost, the union total as listed at the F3 level, which is an increase from the F2 level that we have under current regulations, but under these proposed regulations, we're requesting that districts increase that to the F3 level to reflect the increased cost that's associated with these projects. And then Item 6, district's request would just be multiplying column 5 and column 3. So quantity times the unit cost will give you your total request. OPSC's allowance, that's where our office would provide our review during our verification process. And then column 7 for comments, that's the opportunity for the district to provide any information that they might find helpful for the plan reviewer to, plan pages, how they came up with additional information where we can find that in the submission. So that's part 1 of this proposed form. Part 2 is your soft costs. And so in this soft cost breakout, it's very similar to the formula that we use currently, but we've added a few items just explicitly for districts to kind of insert these items to reflect how much the project is costing and recoup some of the funds that are required for the entire construction process of their reconstruction or rehabilitation process. So 2 that I'd like to point out is item 12 is a DSA inspection fee column. And so that is for projects that require a DSA approval that would be set at 1% of the subtotal. So the subtotal from part 1 of your cost estimate, 1% of that would be your DSA inspection fee for projects that are not exempt from DSA approval and DSA review to have an inspection. The second item that I'd like to particularly point out on this form is item 13, which is the industry specialist report costs. That's for the cost to get your industry specialist report that will gain you eligibility for the program. That is capped at the greater of $10,000 or 1% of that subtotal when you go through your soft cost portion. I wanted to also point out that this form is separate from the site development worksheet. So for projects that are working on reconstruction that are requesting site development costs, this would be separate. The site development worksheet would be using the new construction version of the Sierra West book. That's also known as the Green Book. Sometimes we reference the Green Book. So with that, I am going to move on to our next topic, which is the portable costs. So in our previous stakeholder meeting, I believe our second stakeholder meeting from the 31st of January, we introduced the replacement grants for portable school buildings, and we've received some feedback just supporting the information that we gained with the numbers that we came up with during the second meeting. So that's that bid that we used to get the cost information is introduced again here as attachment C. And that includes the cost that we arrived at for the square footage replacement for a portable building for a project. That would be $93.09 for other classroom space, and $237.23 for toilet space. And I also wanted to point out that that is the total amount. That would be the amount for the full replacement of the portable. In keeping with our replacement grants, the state share of that would be 50% of that. So the calculation would look for other square footage, it would be $46.54 for other space, your standard classroom space for portables, and $118.62 for toilet type space. And I also wanted to point out that these grants include delivery and hookup, so hook up to your utilities, but you can also request separate site development for replacement when you're looking at a portable replacement, and that would be considered under a separate grant, similar to replacement of a building. And then those totals that I just quoted, the $46.54 for other space and $118.62 for toilet space, those will be increased annually every January during the CCI, the current cost index process that is typically published in the January item for the board item. And then with that, I'm going to move on to our supplemental grants for small size projects. So the supplemental grant for small size projects is an additional excessive costs due to hardship grant. This would be offered to new construction or replacement type projects. Previously, the way that this grant is calculated is based on pupil grants, but for those of you who aren't familiar with replacement projects due to square footage, the Facility Hardship program calculates a square footage for replacement and bases the base grant for the replacement projects based on square footage. And that did not directly equate to the pupil grants as they were expressed in the small size project grant. And that is under section 1859.83B in the existing regulations. So with the proposed regulation update, we're proposing to add an additional calculation explicitly for the Facility Hardship program, that it's essentially a conversion between a square footage grant to an effective pupil grant. It's not a direct one-to-one translation, but it's effectively how many pupil grants would you be requesting for a project of this amount. And with that calculation, we would be able to determine whether or not you qualify for a small size project grant with a replacement. And then the next topic that we're covering today is the insurance proceeds collectible. So in the course of reviewing our proposed regulation changes, we found that we wanted to detail a little bit more clearly about how the offsets for insurance is offset off of the grant. So for a little bit of background, projects that come in for facility hardship often can also collect insurance given that there's a safety, if they're insured for that particular cost. So what we would do is we would offset the cost of whatever proceeds the district received for insurance off of the state grant. For rehabilitation projects, we wanted to make it clear that it's not just a 50-50 split off of your insurance. It should align with the actual project funding that's provided. And with rehabilitation projects, which follow a modernization type calculation, that's a 60-40 split with 60% state share and a 40% district share. So we made an update to align that with align the rehabilitation insurance offset to align with that grant. So it would be a 60% offset of any proceeds collectible for insurance. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer.
Thank you, Silvana. So to build off of what Silvana was saying regarding the insurance proceeds, you can see that reflected in 3 different places. One in the proposed regulations for facility hardship, the proposed regulations for seismic is the second, but also you'll find it in SFP regulations section 1859.106, and that's program accountability expenditure audit. So in that area, it specifically talked about the 50-50 split for insurance proceeds, and now what it does is it points back to the facility hardship section to be more precise in which calculation is done depending on what type of funding the project gets. All right, so with that, the next topic is advanced funding for site and design for the seismic mitigation program, but also for facility hardship. So if you look at the end of each section, so what I mean is the end of 1859.82.1 or .2, that's where we are detailing exactly what is needed to be able to submit an application for design funding and then how that funding is calculated. So I think we did like a little spoiler last week and talked about how we were going to go over this today and how we were going to provide the details. But what we decided to do, the difference that you'll see from last week's item to this week's item is that we really wanted it to be very clear exactly the documentation that a district needs to submit. So those are outlined one by one, and then also exactly how you do that calculation instead of pointing to other sections of the regulations where a district would have to go and do some searching to really figure out what they're supposed to do. So we outline the criteria there, and with projects that the work reflects similar to new construction work, the calculation for design funding is the same that the new construction program uses for their projects. And then similarly, for rehabilitation repair projects, the calculation for design funding is the same as what we use for the modernization program in SFP. So just like with those programs as well, if during the review for financial hardship, it's found that the district does have funds available for the project, those funds will be applied before determination of the final grant. So we'll figure out what it would be if they had no funds available. It'll get reduced by the funds that they do have available, and the remaining amount is split between the state and then the financial hardship grant. So it should be a very familiar process for anybody that has ever received design funds through the new construction or modernization program. It is the exact same process that we've done so far for all facility hardship and seismic mitigation program applications that have received design funds already. So this is just trying to put it down in writing and make the process very clear for anyone who hasn't gone through this process yet. All right, so moving on, we're going to go over some of the results of the feedback that we've gotten over the last couple days. Well, really throughout this entire period, both from people coming up and giving public comment and emails that we've received. Before we go through it, I want to thank you guys so much. There's been a lot of very, very helpful feedback that we've received, and it has made a difference in our regulations and making sure that they're more clear, more concise, and understandable. It gives us a better perspective on what the districts are concerned about. So we really appreciate all the feedback that you've given us so far. Okay, so one of the first things that we reviewed following feedback that we received is clarification that certain work required to obtain DSA approval is allowed. And what I mean by that is in section 1859.82, the opening, and then .1, it talks about how projects that are solely because a component or a building has reached the end of its useful life, or because routine maintenance wasn't completed or something of that nature, that work does not qualify in itself for the facility hardship program. What we're wanting to clarify, though, is that we do understand that a district may be required to do some of that work as a result of a separate health and safety issue that they have. And any work that is required by the Division of the State Architect to be able to get approval for their project will be allowed as part of the project costs. And so, trying to think of an example for that. If we, for example, had a project where, due to whatever unusual circumstances, there had to be significant structural work done to the building, if DSA is requiring as part of that to do work on the roof or within the ceiling, and the district has to replace their roof, that can be part of the project as well. Yeah, and that would also include any work that DSA requires for access compliance or fire life safety. For example, sometimes things need to be brought up to ADA code compliance, and that can be included as part of a facility hardship project as well. But trying to differentiate between if something is just out of current code or routine maintenance hasn't been completed yet, that doesn't in itself qualify for the program. Okay, the next point is that in our chart where we outline the amount of square footage you can receive for different types of classrooms and also your minimum essential facilities, we previously in the last two stakeholder meetings had a version where we outlined the amount of square footage that a district could get for severe and non-severe classrooms. So we've removed that, and what will happen at this point is if a district does need to replace severe or non-severe classrooms, the amount of square footage they get will be whatever they had before. So if they had 1,300 square feet before, that's what they would qualify for now, for example. And one of the reasons for that is we got some really excellent feedback regarding the fact that the area that Title V points to in the amount of square footage that you can get for severe and non-severe classrooms has a different loading standard than SFP. And so when you look at that loading standard, it's hard to equate what SFP's loading standard is compared to that education code section and then adjust the classroom size appropriately. And there's many different types of classrooms depending on the need for severe and non-severe. And we decided that it would be most simplistic for the districts and also for the program to just provide whatever the district had pre-existing. Okay, so the next is we added some additional language regarding state agency approvals that are required to submit as part of an approved application. So just like any application for an SFP project, to be able to request the full amount of funding that you are eligible for, you need to submit your DSA approval or your exemption letter from DSA, your CDE approval or your exemption from CDE review, and a CTE letter if you're not in elementary school. So with that, those specific things were not previously spelled out in our regulations. We did discuss already needing a cost-benefit analysis, a cost estimate, an industry specialist report, and those things are all still needed, but these additional state agency approvals are additionally required. And so to be able to encompass all of the district or all of the documents a district would need to submit, we decided to spell those out as well. The next thing is clarification regarding replacement square footage for areas not described in that replacement square footage chart that we have. So we had not specifically had a sentence that said if your space is not in the chart, you get whatever you had before. And so we wanted to spell that out and make it clear for items such as enclosed corridors, hallways, janitor's closets, different type of space like that that really doesn't qualify as a minimum essential facility or a classroom, which is already outlined in the chart. So we've added that as well. And then one more thing that we added is that if there are very unusual extreme circumstances that kept the district from being able to submit their application within the time frame that is outlined in these new regulations, that special considerations can be made. And this is not something that we're planning on, it's not something we anticipate applying to every single project we get, but we wanted to make sure that there is an understanding that we cannot anticipate every unusual circumstance beyond control of the district, and so we want to acknowledge that for very unusual extreme circumstances that we couldn't even anticipate that prohibited the district from being able to apply within that time frame, consideration will be given. Okay, so there are also some feedback that we got that we have not included in these proposed regulations, and so I'll go over that quickly and explain why we have not. So first, there was a question regarding the amount of square footage that is given in our replacement square footage chart compared for like science technology laboratories and science lab, home economic classrooms, that kind of thing, and why and how it compares to our CTE program, so our career technical education program. There's a couple of things with that. So we did talk to CDE about that and the comparison of the two programs and what we felt was appropriate. And the discussion circled around a couple of different things. One is that the facility hardship program is formula-based. It's not based off of exact costs or the exact work that a district's going to do. We're wanting to create a uniform funding program that can be applied universally. But also the purposes of the two different programs are totally different. So our understanding is that for facility hardship, or my understanding, because I'm not an expert in CTE, so jump in if I say this wrong, is that for the career technical education program, a district can design and build not anything they want, but they don't have as many limits for what they design. And while there isn't really a limit on what they design for facility hardship, there is a limit on how they can be funded based off of that, right? So with career tech, it's like design the program that you need and the facilities that you need to be able to achieve your educational goals, and you get up to $3 million for that new construction project, assuming it's a replacement project, or a new construction project. That's different. It's a different mindset and philosophy than facility hardship, where it's we want to make you whole again to whatever you had before. And there's an element of unusual circumstances and need and justifying that you really need to have those classrooms to meet your educational goal. And so there also isn't in the CTE program a specific chart where, depending on what type of classroom you're building, you get a certain amount of space. So to be able to compare those two, it really isn't, it's not apples to apples.
Yeah, I think you got it. I just wanted to jump in just a little and clarify that, the CTE program is really, you're creating a new program. It's autonomous design. You can pretty much do what you'd like to do for your CTE program. Facility hardship is more of the approach of providing, replacement facilities needed to kind of minimum adequacy for those programs. It's not to really enhance or do anything other than just sort of enable you to be able to provide those facilities back again. And that's why we put a little bit more limitation on it, or have some more parameters around it, because like Jen's saying, it's just a difference in approach of, you have one program where you're constructing you're building a new program, you're doing a new thing. You have the ability to control and build what you'd like, whereas facility hardship, we'd really like to, it's outside of program eligibility. We'd really like to just kind of, the spirit of that program, the genesis of it, the statute, provides, minimum needs to get your facility back together and be able to do your instruction again. So.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so to go on to the next topic, so consideration of F4 level of difficulty costing for projects with certain types of work. So what this is referring to is projects for rehabilitation where they've submitted a cost estimate and the costs provided for the project are based off of that cost estimate. There's a request to look at the fourth level of funding that is outlined in the Sierra West current construction cost publication for rehabilitation and repair. So that's the highest cost that book provides for, and we are not choosing to adopt that at this time. There's a couple different reasons for that. Prior to these regs, what we've asked for is the F2 level, and then occasionally districts would get supplemental grants to that, and if they demonstrated a extreme need or an unusual circumstance that they were able to show that they met the criteria of F3, we would provide that cost. So what we've decided instead is that we'll allow the F3 costs without having to demonstrate all of this extra criteria. And then we're going to increase the amount of supplemental grants that a district can get additionally. And I think that when you put that type of funding together, in almost all circumstances, it will make up for the difference of those costs, and it will be able to meet the needs of why somebody would need the costs between F3 and F4. So, for example, in addition to providing the higher level of F3 costs, we have included that projects where they have replacement based off of square footage will be able to request small size project grant. we're allowing the Geo Factor percentage increase for rehabilitation projects. This is significant because I would say of any project I reviewed where they were requesting the F3 or F4 costs previously, one significant reason for that was because of their geographic factor. So the fact that we are now, instead of giving them that higher cost based off of a cost estimate where they would have to put in line by line that F3 or F4 costs for each individual item, we now are going to give them the percentage that has already been established and used for the other programs as well based off of what their geographical area is. And that can make a big difference because there is obviously a higher cost given for F4 projects, but it doesn't vary on whether you're in a geographical location where you would need 5% or way out on Catalina Island where you would need 50% increase. So we're hoping that by providing this geographical factor increase, that we can more appropriately provide what that increase is depending on the special circumstances of where that district is located. And then excuse me, the last thing is that some districts have found that the costs that they receive for rehabilitation is not enough, and they actually qualify for replacement funding even though they're planning on doing rehabilitation work. And so another thing that we've done to change our regulations to help accommodate this is to not require districts to submit an appeal to be able to get that replacement funding and do the rehabilitation work that they want to do. And so this, we're hoping, will be able to provide even increased flexibility for the district and funding to make a local decision on what is most appropriate to do with their facilities based on the circumstances, the costs, the area that they're in, their educational plan. And so instead of providing that F4 level, we've decided that there's these other areas where we can provide increased amount of funding and flexibility to help really better match what the district's needs are based on their circumstances. All right, so the next one is providing funding for industrial technology and education laboratories in the same amount of CT, which we kind of talked about before, but I also wanted to go over, there is a typo in here, the second bullet. It talks about that the laboratory classrooms are 1,300 square feet. We actually talked to CDE, and they said for that type of classroom, it's 960 square feet. But there was also a conversation about if there's a difference between the teaching area and the laboratory area, and sometimes if you have auto shop, for example, you might have a sit down area where you're having instruction, and then you might go out to let's say a warehouse to work on the vehicle. And so there may be a differentiation of space for that reason. If you have specific questions on exactly what that looks like for your projects, please just ask us. We're happy to go through it with you at any time.
Yeah, we actually, when we spoke with CD, they confirmed that their Title V amount does actually include both lab and instructional space. So that's also some of the feedback we got. So is that it? Anything else?
For this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So just one more item to go over. So the last one is we received a request that when districts are doing rehabilitation work, but they qualify for replacement funding, so they get either that replacement square footage funding or pupil grant funding, that they would be able to also request the theoretical site development that they would do in the event that they were replacing that building. We are choosing not to move forward with that request at this time. We acknowledge that districts may have increased costs based on unusual circumstances which led to this request in the past. But again, that we're hoping that by allowing small size project, Geo, the flexibility in how to use the funding, that will help make up for the funding need that led to these requests previously. Also, providing funding for theoretical site development it's almost impossible to determine what the appropriate amount of funding would be because we don't have plans, we don't have specifications, we don't know exactly what would be required based on code, we don't know exactly what DSA would require, and so it's virtually impossible to ensure that we're giving the appropriate amount of funding based on what that work would be. And additionally, if there's an issue in the near future after you receive funding for all that replacement work, you know, there's another question on, well, are you eligible to even partner with the state to receive additional funding for that if we've already paid for replacement of the site, including site development? And that's another kind of question on when it comes to what is the appropriate level of funding to provide for these types of projects where the district has chosen to seek that route of mitigation, where they're taking the replacement funding, but they have chosen to rehabilitate instead. So with that, the last thing that is not on this agenda, and I think, Brian, you already touched on it, was just the 90-day grace period that districts will have once these regulations go into effect to be able to file their applications without having those restrictions on being within the 12-month period of DSA approval or within that period outlined for project completion as well. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. If anybody has questions or comments, we would welcome them at this time.
Mr. Green.
I was told to be last. I don't know if the mic works, I'll just talk loud.
Should.
Jamie Green, Trinity Alps Unified Superintendent. Being a superintendent of a public school, we run with the LCFF budget from the state, which we agree with. We also have to do the LCAP, and that is where we are asked to have our local community be stakeholders. So I just want to take a moment and commend you guys for involving the entire state in what projected changes that you're going to make and role modeling to us at the school sites that if it's good for us, it's also good for you guys. So thank you for your time. I know sometime input is difficult. Not all input is positive and flowery. But being in a situation in our school where we're at, I'm absolutely blown away at how deep you guys have got into schools that are having hardships, both financial and facility, and how well you service all. So this is the third meeting I came to. Everyone got deeper, got better. Just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other comments from anybody? Yes.
He's a tough act to follow.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Kelly Long with Hancock, Park and DeLong. I actually have a very specific question for you about cost estimates. Throughout the facility hardship regulations, the cost estimate states that it is submitted to OPSC, the cost estimate submitted to OPSC shall be the same, for the same scope of work reviewed and concurred by DSA. However, in the SMP 1859.82.2 C3D, the cost estimate which was submitted to and approved by DSA for the minimum required work to mitigate the seismic threat. I'm wondering about that distinction.
Yeah, so,
Because,
sorry, go ahead.
Typically, DSA approves the plans,
Yeah.
not the cost estimates associated with.
Right. So thank you for that question. The thing that we're trying to differentiate or really specify with facility hardship is that for anything that has structural work in it, we are able to ask for DSA's input at our discretion on if that work is appropriate or the work outlined in the estimate is appropriate and matches the plans. There have been projects we've received in the past where DSA approves all the work in the plans, gives a concurrence letter to the minimum work, and then the cost estimate that we receive has significantly more work or different work on it than what is in the plans or what has been concurred to. So what we're trying to specify there is that the work that's outlined in the plans and has been concurred to with DSA needs to match exactly what is in your cost estimate without extra things that they have not looked at or are not in your plans. For Seismic, it's a little bit different. So the Division of the State Architect, they have their procedure 0803, and within that procedure, they require the cost estimate to be submitted and reviewed, which is why we have outlined that phrasing there. So I believe it's in, for phase 2, so that's replacement, and also phase 3, they require the cost estimate to be submitted. They don't look at the costs, they just look at the scope of work that's in it.
DSA does not review costs, they review scope.
Right, okay,
So, yeah.
okay. So that was my concern, that DSA was reviewing costs.
No.
No.
No, it just so happens that that's the best place to do so, because we're going to review those costs. And so if they review the scope within the estimate, we're able to connect them.
Okay, awesome, all right, thank you.
Good question, thanks.
Hi, guys. Jamie Iseman from King Consulting. We have done numerous facility hardship projects with you over the years, and I was at the first stakeholder meeting, and we provided some feedback regarding the proposed timelines and our concerns with that, and also with the conceptual approval process in the hopes of bringing that back. I wasn't able to be at the last meeting, but I know that Rob from our office spoke with you. And I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you listening to us, speaking to you on behalf of our school districts, and providing that special consideration, like you pointed out today, and not closing the door entirely for those special and unusual situations when a district may have not known about the program and might come in later. So we just really appreciate it. I know how hard you all work, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, you bet.
Anyone else? This is truly your last chance. Well, I suppose you could speak at the SAB meeting, but. Okay. I suppose if there is any comments, either from folks that are here today or anybody watching on the webcast, you're still able to submit comments to us. We'll accept them. But our intention is to take these regulations to the February SAB in just a few short weeks. And once again, thank you for all your participation. We appreciate it very much. And we look forward to the next chapter of this program and many other programs to come soon. Thank you.